Hello, and welcome to the Brighter Thinking Pod from Cambridge University Press. My name is Adam, and I'm one of the producers on the pod. Before we get started with today's topic, I want you to imagine the time you'd save if you had classroom assessments that mark themselves. Assessments that adapt to every student's abilities and aptitudes. I'm talking about testing that's suitable for all ages with the power to reveal individual strengths and struggles. This technology frees you to teach, gives you more insight than ever before, and allows you to set motivational goals for each of your students. Sound good? Okay, stop imagining. What I've just described are baseline assessments from the Centre for Evaluation and Monitoring. If you're interested in learning more, go to cem.org. That's CEM.org. Okay, let's get on with the pod.
Hello. Welcome to another episode of the Brighter Thinking Pod from Cambridge University Press with me, your host, Tamsin Hart. My role at the Press is Senior Marketing Executive for our science titles, so I'm looking forward to discussing improving math skills in the science classroom today. The Brighter Thinking Pod brings you bags of advice and conversation from some of your brighter thinkers, authors, teachers and academics, with a slice of entertainment on the side too. Today we're going to be taking a closer look at improving math skills in the science classroom. And we're very lucky to be joined by Richard Needham, past chair of Association for Science Education and member of project teams for the Language of Mathematics in Science and other Association for Science Education projects, and Tom Rainbow, an education support specialist who works for the Advanced Maths Support Programme, who works mostly in supporting the Level 3 Core Maths course in England. The Advanced Maths Support Programme works in collaboration with the ASE. The Association for Science Education is a professional association for science teachers that exists to improve the teaching of science. I should note that in the pod today we'll be making reference to UK qualifications, but we'll be making broader points about the use of mathematical skills and knowledge that are applicable across international qualifications. Remember, all the links and info that we discuss are available in the show notes for your ease. And if you want to get your voice heard on the show, you can get in touch on Twitter using the hashtag BrighterPod or by email at educationmarketing@cambridge.org. Finally, please remember to like, review and subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. So let's start by introducing our guest today. Hello, Richard.
Oh, good morning. And thank you for inviting me along today. We really appreciate that Cambridge University Press have invited the two of us to come along and try and promote the use of mathematics in science teaching. So we do appreciate being invited along. Thank you.
Oh, we're delighted to have you. And hello, Tom.
Hello, and I'd just like to echo Richard's comments there. It's really exciting to be part of this podcast.
Thank you, Richard and Tom. We appreciate you taking the time to share your important research with us today. Now, on with the first question. Richard, if we could start with you, please. How does today's curriculum differ from that in the late 20th century? Has the maths contained in it changed much?
I think there's a perception that there is more mathematics, but in fact, when you look at the detail, it hasn't changed that much. What has changed is that the mathematics has been given more prominence, and also the assessment of mathematics within a science examination has been given a higher status, as there is now a minimum number of marks that must be allocated to mathematical skills. So my view is that no, the curriculum hasn't changed that much, but teachers' perceptions have. And of course, teachers are very keen to do the best they can for their students and have become increasingly aware of their confidence or lack of confidence in teaching mathematical skills. Thank you.
And Tom, what are your thoughts?
Well, I don't speak from a position of knowledge that Richard does regarding science education. I did A-level physics and chemistry in the mid-'80s. And then I didn't have a huge amount to do with the teaching of science as a maths teacher. So it's only since I've been working with the ASE in the last couple of years that it's kind of heightened my awareness of what the demands are in A-level biology. And I have to say that it's the interplay of mathematics and science that is really quite eye-opening for me, and it's evident that it's very challenging. It's challenging for me to work with science with maths within the kind of the biological sphere, because I don't have that biological background, and it's quite been really interesting for me because it's placed me as a learner again, and I'm thinking, how does the maths in this question, how do I unpick it? How do I get to the bottom of it? Even though I know the mathematics, I'm not sure I understand the science well enough to know that I'm doing the right thing mathematically. So whilst it may not have changed dramatically, it's still been really surprising to me. The demands on the science student are really significant, I think.
It's a very interesting insight. Okay, and now what about the maths curriculum, Tom?
Well, the maths curriculum probably hasn't changed a huge amount either, but the way in which teachers are expected to work with mathematics, or encouraged, I suppose, it has changed. And there's been a move in recent years since we started looking particularly to Shanghai, but more widely at international, what's going on in other countries. There's been a kind of a move to deepen the level of understanding. The term mastery has become popular. This idea of really understanding mathematics at a deep level, rather than collecting skills and processes, getting a really solid foundation on which to build. And we're quite excited about this because it's starting the effects of it are starting to come through. And I think this could be really significant for students learning science. Because if those math skills are really embedded, then hopefully they can transfer them into other contexts and other situations that they've always struggled to do. And so that's happening in lower school. And then the big shift in level 3 has been the introduction of core maths, which is a new course, relatively new course, which aims more directly to help students understand how maths applies to context. And that context, of course, could be a scientific one.
So potentially really exciting times.
Yeah, really exciting times. And I don't think, in England, we've ever been in a situation where there's been so much support for the transfer of maths into other subjects.
Brilliant. And Richard, what are your thoughts on this?
I can't quite comment with the same degree of confidence that Tom does about the maths curriculum. But one thing I've become more aware of recently is that children who are studying maths in England at age 16 can be entered for different levels of examination. And it transpires that those entered for a higher level may be studying different aspects of maths than those entered for a lower level. And the science teachers that I work with assume that all pupils have got the same mathematical background, but that's not necessarily true at the moment. So that's just one further challenge that I think science teachers have to get to grips with, that they may be teaching children who've not been taught a particular mathematical idea, and yet they're expected to know it within the science curriculum.
And even within that, if I can come in, even within that, if you have learnt the same maths as, been taught the same maths as somebody else, and you've got, say, a grade 6 in your GCSE, that still means you've got a significant amount of questions wrong in that assessment. You don't have to get a massive score to get a level 6 in your GCSE mathematics. So, working on the assumption that all of that stuff that's been taught has been learned is very problematic, because a lot of the time students have a very weak or insecure understanding of a lot of those topics that I think as a science educator, you might think, well, they've been taught it, so they know it. So lots of challenges there, definitely, in how to work with students in a science classroom with mathematical ideas.
Yes, thank you. And definitely no assumptions that can be made with your students.
No, I don't think so.
Thank you. Now, Richard, To continue, why do you think students find it so hard to transfer their skills from the maths to the science classroom?
Ooh, I think there's lots of reasons. For some students, unfortunately, they just come down the corridor from the maths classroom, they go into a science lab, and they don't think they should be taught any maths. They thought they'd left that behind before the bell went. So I don't think children find it easy to transfer from one set of lessons to another. And part of that might be due to the language that's being used. So science teachers quite often won't have had a formal maths education themselves since they were at school, and things change. And so the language that a teacher in the science room might be using to describe a particular mathematical operation could be completely different from that used by the maths teacher. So I think there are problems within a particular school to ensure that there's a consistent approach and a consistent language used across all departments. But then I think we as science teachers have to appreciate that mathematics as a subject has a different philosophy from science. And whereas a mathematical education might help you understand the reason why a particular system works, in science it will go a step further than that. And the mathematics is only a step towards elucidating some kind of scientific principle. And so the purpose, for instance, of drawing a graph in mathematics could be quite different from drawing a graph in science. And yet the science teacher just thinks it's not an issue at all. And so I think the purposes of education need to be sorted out as well. So basically, I think people's aspirations and attitudes and language and the methods they use and the purposes they're doing it for are all up for grabs. And it's something we ought to talk more about.
Brilliant, fantastic. I'm glad we're having this discussion now. And
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts, Tom?
Well, I was really struck with what Richard said about, the bell going and maths has been left behind in the maths classroom, because that really chimes with me. And as a maths teacher of 25 years, I would hate to have to count up the number of times I was asked by a student, particularly in Key Stage 4, actually, why am I learning this? What's the point in learning this? Because a lot of what we do in the maths classroom at that age is quite abstract, really. And a lot of students can't see the point of knowing how to expand a double bracket or, factorize a quadratic equation. And we're not particularly good, I don't think, as maths teachers. I don't think it comes easily to maths teachers to know how the mathematics necessarily fits into the wider picture. And so a lot of the times, that's what I think students see maths as, is this kind of set of abstract ideas which happens in a maths classroom and not really anywhere else. And then they come to the A-level biology classroom or the A-level chemistry classroom, and they're faced with this kind of interplay between what's happening mathematically and what's happening within this new context, where it's a lot of new content, of technical language and technical ideas, deep scientific ideas. And there's this cognitive overload, I think, where they're thinking, well, I can only just about hang on to the science, and then you're expecting me to do some percentages on top of that? Oh no, and that's where the wheels come off the pram, I think. And I think it's a really difficult thing to know how to approach. The one thing that teaching core maths has brought me is this realization that if you start off with a context and then you find the maths that fits that, then that changes the student's perception of what maths is. And that's a really helpful thing to happen to those students. It's very transformative. So what core maths tries to do is not focus too much on new content, new mathematical content, but take this stuff that the students already have, but place it differently so that they're coming out of context and they're realizing that the maths they already have at their disposal can help them understand that context better. And it doesn't really matter what that context is. It could be something geographical. It could be something which is to do with psychology. It could be something that, a newspaper headline. they're just changing their relationship with mathematics. And I think that is a game changer for what then goes on to happen in the science classroom, because they're used to seeing maths happening else in other ways which are different to what they perceive it to be when they do their GCSE.
Fantastic. It's interesting how much comes up in our pod discussions. Cognitive load seems to be a really important consideration for teachers.
Yes, it does. It seems to be increasingly on my mind. And in fact, we were doing a session for biology teachers this week, and I think that phrase was used quite a few times by the person who was leading the session. It is really challenging. I look at these biology questions and I think, how do I go about unpicking this? I think I know what the maths is, but I'm not 100% sure I'm right, because I'm not sure I understand the biology well enough to know whether I'm selecting the right mathematics to do the job.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you. And what, Tom, do you think are the differences between the mathematical content at GCSE and A-level?
Well, it's an interesting one. I don't think the approach between the learning of maths at A-level and the approach to learning GCSE mathematics is that different, actually. I've got a very rough and ready kind of rule of thumb that GCSE maths is all about doing mathematics, and A-level maths is about doing harder mathematics. And I think what core maths is about using mathematics, and that's the difference. So I think at A-level, a lot of the time we focus on doing harder mathematics, but it's still quite abstract a lot of the time. There's a lot of practice, there's a lot of repetition in the types of questions that you're doing. You're working with some beautiful ideas, and I'm a huge fan of A-level mathematics. It was such a pleasure for me to learn it. And obviously I went on to make it my life. But it's a very different sort of thing to learning about contextualization of mathematics. And even when at A-level maths you're learning about statistics or mechanics, it's still a very quick route out of those into pure mathematics a lot of the time. You're ditching the context to try and get to the mathematics rather than staying within the context and exploring that through mathematics, which is quite different.
Brilliant. And what are your thoughts about that, Richard?
Oh, well, if we just go back a bit, I think leading up to 16, traditionally, all children were taught science. And the physics teachers were quite happy teaching the mathematical aspects of what they needed in their course. And the biologists tended to sit back a bit and allow the physics teachers to do the maths input. And I think it gave rise to this sensation that maybe biology is a softer option if you're not very numerate. And therefore, we've got into a cycle where perhaps biology is not seen as a mathematical subject, and yet it is at A-level. Before 16, I think the mathematics that's laid down in specifications tends to be very similar across all the science disciplines. But as soon as you start specialising, then the mathematical requirements diverge. And a good grounding in the kind of maths you need in physics is not going to get you very far in biology. Particularly, there's one area of mathematics, I think, that post-16 biology courses find problematic is an area of statistics. And what do you do with variability in data? So in biology, things are not as cut and dried. There is variation in the data you collect, and you need some techniques to handle that. Whereas I think in physics, and to a lesser extent in chemistry, you can control the variables better. The data you get fits a pattern, and therefore the need to look at statistics is far less. And so that whole area of mathematics is alien to a lot of students when they come into post-16 biology courses. And I think the biology teachers find it very difficult to teach. And quite often, the area of biology in which this kind of mathematical teaching goes on is complex in its own right. So the kind of biology that's being taught is probably new to the children, and it's quite complex stuff, and they're trying to learn complex mathematical techniques in the context of complex biological techniques. And as Tom's mentioned, that can overload the system for the teacher as well as the pupils from time to time. So just to go back a little bit, you mentioned in your introduction that I'd been involved in a project called The Language of Mathematics in Science, which the ASC was involved in up to about 4 years ago, which was guidance for science teachers on how to teach the mathematics that's required in the sciences up to age 16. And that was really to give teachers the confidence of developing the language and approaches that were consistent across the piece. And I think that CUP, Cambridge University Press, did a great job at translating that guidance into activities that pupils could do. And so they produced some workbooks at that time to help pupils develop confidence in mathematics that followed a similar pattern to the Language of Mathematics in Science book. And it covered all the areas as well. And there were slight differences between the chemistry, the physics, and the biology, because, of course, in biology, there's probably a greater use of graphs and presenting data in a graphical format, whereas in physics, there may be a greater emphasis on rearranging formulae and calculating values. But at least those 3 different workbooks reinforce each other and cover the breadth of maths that's needed. What we haven't got is something similar post-16. And I think that's where Tom comes in, and where working with the AMSP is a real bonus, that it helps science teachers who are not maths specialists recognise the kind of support that is available and gives them the confidence to know that there are things they can do and share with each other that are well thought through and are guaranteed to help students learn their subject. So, just in précis, gone are the days when you can get through biology without doing any maths, and the earlier we can confront that, the better. And getting children engaged in mathematics programs post-16 to support their learning post-16, I think the better it'll be for everyone.
Fantastic. That sounds really great advice. And thank you for raising about the workbooks there. We'll talk about those a little bit later on, and we'll put a link in the notes to those as well. But it's been great to collaborate with the ASC on those. Okay, now let's move on to the next question. Now, Richard, I think for you again, I wondered if you could next provide a snapshot of the post-16 education landscape you've mentioned regarding mathematics teachings in schools and colleges, both in terms of mathematics qualifications and the use of mathematics to support learning in other subjects.
Well, from a science teacher point of view, I would think the majority of students who study physics post-16 would also be studying mathematics. And they would have some issues, but not a significant number of issues in adapting their mathematical skills to cope with an A-level physics course, because there isn't a lot of overlap, I think, between A-level mathematics and A-level physics. When it comes to biology, it's quite a different story. And although more students study biology post-16 than study physics, very few of them also study mathematics. And so in some schools, the only mathematics available post-16 is A-level mathematics. And it's not something that the majority of A-level biology students would think is something for them to study. So we really need courses post-16 in mathematics. And there have been attempts over the years to provide a non-examination maths course, but I think I'd like to leave that up to Tom to talk more about how we could incorporate core maths into post-16 to benefit these A-level biology students and others.
Brilliant. So, in fact, over to Tom.
Well, yeah, I mean, just listening to what you were saying there, Richard, I found the maths in A-level physics a lot more accessible than the maths in A-level chemistry. And, you know, I never quite understood why that would be, but it strikes me that it is a much better fit with A-level maths, the maths which is in A-level physics, than the maths in A-level chemistry. And in chemistry, I never really understood the chemistry well enough to understand how the maths fits with it. And it was a lot less obvious to me. And I think, the further you go away from A-level maths, in the maths that's expected to be used in a science subject, the harder it is for the A-level mathematician to access it. So I actually think, it could be that, your A-level students who are studying A-level biology would actually find that a far more challenging thing to see how the maths fits than those that are studying A-level physics, or a student which is studying both would find the biology harder than the physics in that sense. It's as you kind of highlighted earlier, I think it's a messier thing, the maths in biology. You're dealing with uncertainty, you're dealing with results which don't quite fit a model. You're having to try and find things which work rather than having something which is a bit more directly predictable and sort of coming out of the mathematics of Newtonian physics and so on. There have been a very, very few, but there have been a couple of studies where people have looked at how students have done in various A-level subjects if they've been studying A-level maths or core maths alongside it. And there's one college in particular in the northwest of England who have taken the ALP scores in various subjects and broken them down by who's studying what mathematically. And they found that for A-level chemistry and A-level biology, the students did best if they were doing A-level maths, but they did better if they were doing core maths than if they were doing no maths at all. They actually found that it was the other way around for A-level psychology and A-level geography, that those students were doing better if they'd studied core maths than if they studied A-level maths. But it's a very small scale study. There's not a huge sample size, so treat it with caution. There's no doubt in my mind that doing some maths alongside these subjects is going to help. And as you said earlier, Richard, I think it's about 35% of A-level biologists do A-level maths alongside it. It's quite a small proportion. So that's 65% of A-level biologists doing no maths at all. And those students are going to be significantly disadvantaged, I think. So core maths is the obvious fit. And I would suggest that perhaps core maths fits better with A-level biology than A-level maths does, even though that study suggests otherwise. I don't think core maths is the right thing for an A-level physicist to be studying. They should be studying A-level maths, to be honest. They need those it's helpful for them to have those skills which A-level maths develop. And then chemistry is kind of somewhere in between, I'd say. I think well served by either, but I think it would be very difficult to study A-level chemistry without any additional maths. So that's what core maths is about. It's really kind of trying to support that study.
So now we're going to move on. Thanks, Tom. We are going to actually talk about core maths a bit later on. Now, Richard, to bring this specifically back to science, what would you want a course that would support the teachers of biology A-level to do?
Well, briefly, I think my main priority is that it gives teachers confidence to tackle the mathematics that's within their subject, to give them the confidence to say, this is for me to teach, and I need to learn how to teach this within my subject context. So that would be the first thing. I think the second thing would be to open a dialogue, to get teachers together to be able to share ideas and to develop that way of speaking or language that develops a consistency across the profession. So at the moment, I don't think people talk very much about the mathematical content. They just see it as a problem and put it on one side. And I think if we could bring that out in the open and have conversations, then it would help teachers develop the language and recognise the issues and share good techniques or good practice to enable students to improve. I think on a longer term basis, whole schools issues are important to tackle mathematics. I don't think mathematics sits in the centre in the same way that literacy might sit in the centre of an education system. So it's not just having a course for biology teachers to improve the teaching of biology. I would like such a course to open up a dialogue across other subjects as well, so that people talk to teachers of other subjects which also have a mathematical content, so that, again, there's more consistency of approach, and then subjects might support each other. It's not just the biologists having to do everything themselves. So I think it's the prime function is to give people the confidence to have a conversation which can then spread within the department and then between teachers of other subjects would be my prime aim for a mathematics course.
Fantastic. I love the idea of a holistic school approach to mathematics. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that the holistic approach is really important. You want to develop the entire teacher, don't you? So, I do think that focusing on picking up the mathematics and becoming more confident with it. I think, from the work that we've done with A-level biology teachers this year, alongside the work that we've done with A-level psychology and A-level geography teachers, the levels of confidence have varied significantly between the different cohorts, but also within the cohort. And a lot of the time teachers are saying to us, I want you to start at quite a low level. Occasionally we get feedback that they found the pace a little bit fast. Others are saying, well, actually, I know most of this stuff already. It's very difficult to get it right. Everybody's got different experiences, different relationships with mathematics. And so, just trying to get people to feel that they're confident and that they can deal with unpredictable situations, questions which take them outside of their comfort zone, where they were going off script. You want teachers to feel like they're happy to be reactive within the classroom. Otherwise it becomes very staid. And I think when you aren't confident about your subject knowledge, then your teaching can become very dry and you become very scripted. And that's where, it becomes it doesn't feel like it's a pleasure to learn it a lot of the time. So I think, the more that we can do to just give teachers that confidence, that's what we're trying to achieve with the courses that we're running, I think.
Could I just come in there, Tom? Because we now have quite a bit of experience of running courses for A-level biology teachers that you and your team have put together. And what's fascinated me is the range of different software tools that are available to support teachers, to give science teachers insights into ways of teaching that maybe they've never encountered before. And I think the response we've had on these courses to a particular piece of software to put across an idea or a principle or to go and practice on at home has been remarkable. It's really raised the teachers' confidence levels, I think. So, raising confidence through seeing experts at work is one thing, but then recognizing that you could do the same thing yourself is quite another. And I think that's where the course has been successful.
It's phenomenal, the amount of technology that's out there now that you can use within the classroom for free. It's just a fantastic time to be doing this sort of thing. And what those software packages that you mentioned do is they enable you to explore variation, to look at change. And the students who say, what happens if, which is a fantastic way to phrase a question in a classroom, I think. What happens if this changes? Well, you can explore that then. And that's a really powerful thing, I think, to have in the classroom.
Fantastic to have technological development driving math skills. That's brilliant. Okay, now let's return to core maths now, Tom. What does core maths do? How is it structured? And how can it support the learning of biology?
Okay, so what it does is it tries to take the maths that the students already have a lot of the time. So I'd say about 60% of the course, of the various courses in core maths, and I'll get into what they are in a minute, about 60% of that would be GCSE higher tier content. Things like the use of percentages, standard form, rounding numbers. In fact, anything in the higher tier course at GCSE in mathematics could be drawn on within a question in core maths. So a lot of the time, the students aren't really learning new mathematics, but they're learning new ways to work with mathematics. But then they are learning new skills as well. So they'll learn, a lot of them will learn how to use, how to find standard deviation and what it means, and how it's used in the interpretation of data. That's not something they would have learned at GCSE. And they'll also learn some probability that they, like cost-benefit analysis, for example. They'll learn how to use a spreadsheet, which, in this day and age is such an important skill and isn't done elsewhere in the school curriculum at the moment. So that's another really important thing that core maths does. And then more importantly, I think of those kind of the skills which are harder to kind of pin down. They aren't mathematical, but are just as important, like the critical analysis of information. So a newspaper headline, for example, can we trust it? Is it reliable? Are we being misled? Having the skill to be able to, and the confidence to be able to unpick that using mathematics, really important, I think, in this day and age. So that sort of thing, the exploration of data and statistics as well, are really important. Mathematical modelling. So it does all of these things, but it doesn't have the clutter of lots of new content. So you have the freedom to go off on tangents, react to students' questions, explore things, have a conversation about a context. You might spend half a lesson talking about something which is really not that mathematical, but the mathematics will come. So that's what it does. And it's structured, it's an AS equivalence. So students will either learn it over the course of 1 year or over the course of 2 years. But if they learn it over the course of 1 year, then it's kind of gets the same amount of time on the timetable as any other subject that they're learning. If they learn it over the course of 2 years, then generally they have about half the amount of time in the week. And they'll take the exam at the end of year 13. So in that way, it's the same as an AS in terms of the UCAS points that get offered, and it has the same amount of guided learning hours as an AS. There are various versions that you can take. So the various exam boards offer it, and there are various options that you can do within it. I won't go into those details now, but if you're interested, have a look at our website, and there's lots of information about core maths on the AMSP website. And it can support the learning of biology because it just gives the students confidence to work within context. And so much of working with mathematics is to do with confidence. So that's its primary aim. I mean, I've had some fantastic students along the way. In fact, I used to teach it over 2 years in my old school. And we had a student at the end of year 12 who wanted to leave the school because she wanted to go and study elsewhere because her other courses weren't going particularly well. So she was going to go into the local city. But she wanted to try and arrange to come back to our school just to do core maths because she was worried that she wasn't going to be able to continue studying the course when she moved schools, which I thought was a real seal of approval, that she was prepared to go that far to carry on studying it. So, I think students really value it, and they really see that it changes their relationship with the subject.
Mm. Wonderful to see that enthusiasm for it. And we will, of course, put any links you've mentioned into the show notes so you'll be able to see that research. And Richard, what do you think about this?
We've had various conversations with the teachers who are part of the focus group of our current project. And I don't think core maths gets taken up by sufficient numbers of schools, would be my first point. And I can't understand why, because when course presenters have demonstrated resources that are available through core maths, it coincides really neatly with the kind of mathematics that the teacher's trying to teach in biology. So that there is already a package of resources out there for biology teachers to use, and all it needs is their school to register, and those resources are available to anybody else in the school. So I don't understand why people don't do that more frequently, unless we just haven't got the word out yet. But on the downside of that is, I don't think core maths is necessarily given a high enough priority by school leadership teams at times. And so, like quite a number of courses post-16, if it's not an A-level course, it may not get the same status, and therefore it may not get the same timetabling priorities, or it might not get the same staffing priorities. And so I think there's a job to be done to allow teachers to talk to senior leaders in schools to say, this is important for our subject. We want children to go through a course like core maths that will give them the confidence in a whole range of different subjects. And we want to make sure that this school implements that as a policy decision. I don't think those kind of conversations go on often enough. And it's not helped by the situation schools find themselves in at the moment, where education has been disrupted by global issues. But hopefully we'll get back to that soon. And, I think it's just something we need to keep chipping away at.
I have to just say that we're really pleased that the British Academy and the Royal Society have recently released a statement strongly in support of core maths, with some really important recommendations to do with things like funding and recognition by universities and employers. So, that's a massive move, and hopefully will be really influential and helpful in letting those conversations, giving teachers a bit more confidence and a bit more ammunition to say, hang on, look, these important bodies are recognising this course as being really important.
Brilliant. Okay, let's now move on to life beyond formal education. So, Tom, what do you think can be done to prepare students for post-16 study and ultimately life beyond that formal education?
I'm really interested in that second question, this idea of preparing students for life. And in fact, the various core maths awards have got different names. Then only the OCR versions are called core maths. The AQA version is called Mathematical Studies, for example, and edXL's is Maths in Context. NCFE's award is called Maths for Work and Life, and I think that's a really nice way of Maths for Everyday Life. I think it's a really good way of describing what core maths is all about. It's not just about your study; it's about preparing students for life beyond the classroom, beyond their studies. And having spoken to some students who study core maths recently, a lot of them were saying that one of the things that they really took out of it was the work which they do on personal finance, because they see that as being part of their future and something they should know about when they leave school. And so, in interviewing these students recently, they were kind of flabbergasted that they weren't learning about that elsewhere in their school studies, and couldn't quite work out why, when they were learning about things like percentages in GCSE, why weren't they learning about how to manage their money and at the same time learning about percentages? Why were they just doing questions which were completely abstract and uncontextual? So, core maths, because it has this remit to work within context, a lot of the time they're working on things which they can see are important for their life beyond the classroom. Having also spoken to some other ex-students in the past, they said, understanding how to use a spreadsheet is the one single most important thing that they learn in core maths. because they were all using it within their apprenticeships or within the work that they went on to do. And they couldn't believe that they weren't learning about it elsewhere. So it's a big thing, and I think students are always surprised, aren't they, at how much mathematics crops up in their lives when they leave school.
And that's always the protest you hear as well when someone doesn't want to study mathematics. I'll never use this in real life. So to be able to identify that is so powerful.
That's right. And I suppose, even if you're thinking, well, the work that I'm going to go on to do isn't that mathematical, well, a lot of the time, those people who are successful within those spheres end up going into management and running businesses and things. And then all of a sudden, they're completely surrounded by mathematics.
Absolutely. Richard, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think society is responsible for some of this, like all things. I think there's a view that mathematics is for an elite. It's a little bit nerdy. It's not for everybody. And I think, anecdotally, people say, oh, I was never any good at sums at school. But they wouldn't say that about being able to read or speak. And so I think, we have to recognise that mathematics is far more than just being able to do sums. It's a way of thinking. And that way of thinking is absolutely critical as society becomes more complex. It gives you the ability, as Tom said, to unpick inaccurate statements or data that's presented to you or so-called evidence of a particular way of thinking. And I just think that we as a society don't give it sufficient status. Just pick the media, think of some television presenters. You can think of them in fields of drama and art and music and literature and so on TV quite easily. But I'd like you to come up with the names of some famous TV presenters that present mathematical ideas. And I've tried, and I can't figure out more than the numbers of fingers on one hand of well-known names that have got a kind of mathematical message to sell. So, I think it's time that we recognised that any subject of learning in the school curriculum and college curriculum involves mathematics, that the amount of mathematics it involves is increasing, and that the need for that mathematical thinking is spilling over into everyday life, and it's only going to increase as time goes on. And I think a really good illustration of that has been some of the language and evidence that's been put forward by various people regarding the recent pandemic over the last 2 years. We need maths. We need people to be confident in maths. And we need to exercise our mathematical brains far more than we do at the present, I believe.
Absolutely. We definitely need maths. Hear, hear. Okay, let's look at the next question now. And we're thinking about an ideal world now. In an ideal world, Richard, what would you like to see in terms of provision and support for mathematical skills for all students about to become adult members of society?
A number of years ago, the Royal Society of Great Britain had a project called the Vision Project. And their vision was that within 20 years, there would be a number of changes in the way people are educated. And for me, the standout one of those was that every person up to the age of 18 ought to receive formal education in mathematics. And I would just like to see that fulfilled. I think every post-16 course should have mathematics recognised within it, and there should be more than one opportunity for students who wish to learn some maths. So they don't just have the opportunity of doing A-level maths in this country, but there is a range of mathematical courses that will support learning in other subjects. And I don't think that would take too much effort, but it does need a bit of commitment. And it's hard to see where that commitment's coming from at the moment, other than people like Tom chipping away at the environment and teacher organisations beginning to recognise the part that they have to play in this.
Do you have any sense of what the situation is like internationally?
I think a lot of the things that I've been talking about this session are probably to be found in Western Europe and Americas to a large extent. I don't think we're that different, really, in our education systems. But I do think there is a difference as you go further east, in the Middle East and the Far East. I think mathematics is given far more importance. But I hope Tom can fill me in on that if I've misspoken there.
And Tom, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting you should ask that, Tamsin, because core maths came out of a series of studies that were conducted by the Nuffield Foundation that were commissioned at the time by the Chancellor of the Exchequer. I think it was probably George Osborne back then, looking at international comparisons in maths education. And they looked at 24 different countries at the levels of maths education in those countries. And these weren't just countries in Asia or in the Far East or the Middle East, as you said there, Richard, but all around the world. So places like France and Spain were included. So was the USA were represented by Massachusetts for some reason. Australia, New Zealand. So it was quite evenly dispersed set of 24 countries. And the 4 countries of the United Kingdom were included within that as separate countries because they have separate education systems. And they found that in 18 of the 24 countries, more than 50% of students were studying some form of mathematics beyond what would be deemed their GCSE equivalent. Whereas in England at the time, 13%, that's 13% of students were studying some form of mathematics beyond GCSE. And in fact, of the 6 countries that weren't studying, didn't have more than 50% of their students studying some higher level mathematics, 4 of those countries were England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. The other 2 happened to be Spain and Hong Kong, and they were very close to 50%. So, internationally, at the time we were lagging so far behind that the report was entitled "Is the UK an Outlier?", which I thought was an interesting title. And I think you can reach your own conclusions there. So core maths came about partly in response to that because something had to be done. This situation was really quite a different, presented a set of challenges which the country didn't need at the time. And I think the people within this country, we're increasingly globalized, and we will be disadvantaged if we haven't got those math skills. So our workforce, our students who are going into universities, they will be disadvantaged if they are not studying maths to the same level as young people elsewhere. So core maths came about, and as Richard's kind of alluded to, there are so many challenges still which exist within our system to enable or encourage schools to take it up. And in an ideal world, all schools in this country, in England, would be offering core maths that have a sixth form. That's my ideal, and that the majority of students who are able to take it would be taking it. And we're talking about 200,000 students roughly who don't study A-level maths. A-level maths is the most popular A-level, but it's only 90,000 students out of around about 300,000 students annually that go through our system. So there's a lot of students who pass GCSE mathematics who don't carry on with mathematics. And in an ideal world, the majority of those would. But crucially would want to be there as well. I think that's really important. We don't want them to feel like they have to be there. We want them to want to be there in an ideal world, that they recognise its importance and they enjoy it.
Those are some very startling statistics. So thank you for sharing those with us.
That's okay. I've got them at my fingertips because I'm so used to reeling them off. But it is a very strong argument as to why we should be doing this course, I think.
Fantastic. Right. Well, it's been fantastic discussing your research today. I'm going to take us back to the workbooks at this point. Cambridge University Press have been very lucky to incorporate that research into the production of their maths skills workbooks for both Cambridge IGCSE and Cambridge International AS and A-level biology, chemistry and physics. These workbooks support the development of learners' mathematical skills within the context of the science syllabuses. Can I ask which particular challenges the workbooks support learners on, and which of your particular research findings are applied to help develop their skills? Richard, perhaps you could lead on that for me.
First and foremost for me, it's the use of graphs and the way that students draw graphs. And the kind of background to that was that I used to run courses where I gave a group of teachers a table with about 10 sets of data in 10 pairs of data points and asked them to plot a graph of it. And I could guarantee that every single variation in graph drawing would be apparent by the end of 10 minutes. The use of scales, the which axes were which, how to label the axes, what units were used, where they put the points on the graph, what they drew between those points, were all different. There was no consistency. And so one of my ambitions is to try and get graph drawing recognized as having specific purposes, and there are specific graphs and there are the right ways and wrong ways of doing it. So graphing is a big issue for me. The second thing that surprised me was just basic number work and how to represent numbers and what kinds of units to use, and can you convert one unit to another unit. And people find that incredibly difficult. And so we had a go, and I'm not so sure it was successful, that rather than using lots of units with prefixes in to mean a lot of or very few of, why not teach children to use standard form? And it turned out that in mathematics, they're unlikely to have been taught standard form at the point when they need it for biology or for any science, really. And so I think we need to think through as a profession, is that a good idea, and when should it be included in the curriculum? And would it solve problems or would it create more problems? Proportionality and ratios always cause problems. And it's used an awful lot in biology, but we just don't realise that it's used a lot in biology. So we don't use that language to describe it. And yet it's recognised in mathematics that those are ideas that children find hard. And included in that, in biology in particular, there is quite a lot of work on shape and volume and area, and representing those as ratios as well. And I've had a go with teachers where I've asked them to work out a surface area to volume ratio, and they've been stumped, and yet they're expected to teach it at GCSE. So some teachers are definitely having to draw on their memory of what they did when they were pupils themselves. And I think it just is an indication to me that some things are being pushed to the back of their thinking, and it's time to draw them forward. And so I think having these ideas in front of you in a workbook where you're addressing the mathematical ideas rather than the scientific ideas, although you're providing a scientific context, is a real strength that helps put mathematics to the forefront of people's thinking and gets them thinking about what is the right way to teach this that is going to help everybody. And if it doesn't work, I can now have a conversation with somebody else who's recognised it as an issue. And so hopefully we can share good practice as well. I could go on. There's almost as many areas of problems in maths as there are areas of maths when it comes to learning science, I'm afraid. But those are probably the main three for me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Tom, do you have anything to add?
Not really. I think Richard's done a really good job of taking that and expanding on it. But the only thing I would say is that a good textbook is really a way of communicating an ethos or a vision. And I think that, it sounds as though, what you're describing there, Richard, it's very clear what the ethos is. And I'm sure that's come through in the workbooks. So, it's something that they do very well in the Far East, actually. I think, looking at the way in which the Japanese textbooks work, and they've very clearly thought through that, what is it that we're trying to achieve on every single page? There's not a page of wastage. And, I've used quite a few maths textbooks over the years that haven't been so successfully put together. So, it is make or break a lot of the time. It's the way in which you get a mass group of people to recognize a vision, isn't it? And you communicate it through the pages of your book.
Brilliant. Thank you both. And you can find out all about the workbooks in the link that I'm going to put in the show notes. And now our final question. What are your top 3 tips for our teachers to take away on how to support their learners using mathematical skills and science lessons at upper secondary level and then in their post-16 studies? Let's start with you, Tom.
Well, I'm gonna be a bit minxy here. I'm going to come up with one, and then I'm going to hand over to Richard and see what he comes up with next. Because I don't think it's fair that I come up with 3 and then leave it to him to try and think of some new ones. My first tip is talk to each other. Find the time to have a conversation with other departments, and you'll be amazed at the benefits that come out of that. So find out about what your maths department are doing. Find out about what your science department are doing. Talk about the way in which the commonality between what you teach and what's different as well. It's just worth its weight in gold. And it's usually, in my experience, the first thing that goes when you get busy. But I would really strongly recommend it.
Now, Richard, your first point.
I can't decide what order to put these in. So as Tom's talked about talking, I'll leave that for a second. So my first tip would be to teach the mathematical content before children need it to understand some science. In other words, provide them with an easy context to learn the mathematical skill and then build up to applying the difficult science concept that requires that mathematical skill. So I think there's a tendency to teach the hard maths with the hard science just before the exam when everybody's pressured and a bit fraught and so forth. Why not introduce mathematical ideas in science much earlier? The second one would be adopt a consistent approach. So the same language, the same techniques to be used with other colleagues in the department, so that it doesn't matter at the end of the year that a new teacher takes that class, because they're using the same technique that their colleagues have used earlier to help the continuity of pupils. And if it could be between subjects, that would be great. Which leads me on to my third point, which is exactly what Tom said, which is talk to your colleagues in your subject to get more consistency, and then talk to teachers in other subject areas to look at the how, the why, and the when they teach different aspects of maths, and try to develop something as a whole school approach to give more consistency and, I suppose, logic to the sequence in which we try to help children overcome these challenges that they encounter.
Fantastic. Now, Tom, what about your final 2 points?
Well, my second one is, unsurprisingly, I suppose, get your school to offer core maths. You really need to be doing that if you're not doing that already. And thirdly, I think it's just going back to what Richard was saying earlier, try and raise the profile of mathematics so that it's not the subject which people say, oh, I could never do that when I was at school. But it's something that people say, I'm proud that I understand and like maths. It's a really important set of life skills that you're severely disadvantaged if you haven't grasped. So embrace it and enjoy it and be excited by it and use it to understand other things well.
So that's all for our Improving Maths Skills in the Science Classroom episode today. Don't forget to tell your friends about us and rate our show on whatever platform you're listening on. Our show notes have lots of useful links that we've discussed throughout the show. Follow us on Twitter at CUP Education or use the hashtag #BrighterThinking to respond. You can also email us at educationmarketing@cambridge.org. So it's goodbye from me and goodbye from Tom and Richard.